Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating and, let's be honest, kind of complex part of the Old Testament. Think of it as a divine blueprint, spelling out how imperfect people could actually live in the presence of a perfect God.
And really, it all boils down to this one huge question. I mean, how does that even work? If God's presence is completely pure and holy, how can it possibly exist right in the middle of a community that is, well, messy, imperfect, and sinful? It's a massive dilemma.
So God's answer wasn't just a random list of do's and don'ts. No, it was this incredibly detailed, comprehensive plan. It was a whole system designed to deal with sin and maintain purity, making it possible for a holy God to dwell with his people without his awesome presence, completely destroying them.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this blueprint down. First, we'll look at the single most important day on the ancient Israelite calendar. Then, we'll get into its most memorable, striking ritual. After that, we'll see how these big ideas shape the rules of daily life. And finally, we'll see how it all came together to define what a holy community was supposed to look like.
First up, this radical solution for the entire nation's sin. We're not talking about individual mistakes here. This was a massive, annual reset for the whole community. It all happened on one special day, the Day of Atonement.
You see, this was totally different from the personal sacrifices people might bring for their own mess-ups. This was a national event, a collective cleansing. It was designed to purify the community from all the sins they didn't even know they'd committed, the hidden stuff, so that God could continue to live among them safely.
Now, the place where this all went down, well, it was the most sacred and, frankly, the most dangerous place on earth, the most holy place. This was not a casual trip. Remember, 2 of the high priest's own sons had died for entering this space improperly. So the rules were crystal clear. This was a life and death situation reserved for one person on one single day of the entire year.
And right at the heart of that sacred room was something called the mercy seat. This golden lid sitting on top of the Ark of the Covenant was seen as God's literal throne on earth. It was this exact spot where the high priest had to perform the ritual to atone for the sins of the whole nation.
Okay, so this is where things get really fascinating. At the core of the Day of Atonement ceremony was this really powerful and kind of strange ritual involving 2 goats that looked exactly alike, but had very, very different fates.
So you have these 2 goats. The first one was sacrificed as a sin offering. Its blood was used to ritually cleanse and purify the holy space itself, which had been contaminated by the people's sin. But the second goat, it had a totally different job. It became the famous scapegoat, and its whole purpose was the physical, visible removal of the nation's sin.
I mean, just picture it. This ritual made forgiveness something you could see. The high priest literally lays his hands on the goat's head and confesses all the sins of Israel, basically transferring all that guilt onto the animal. And then, everyone could watch as that goat was led far, far away into the desert, carrying their sins with it until it just disappeared. As the source material points out, it's pretty easy to see why Christians later saw this as a powerful picture of what Jesus would do. This image of one being carrying away the sins of many, well, that becomes a central idea in Christian theology.
But, these ideas about holiness weren't just for one special day a year. No way. They spilled over into everyday life, starting with one of the most powerful symbols in the ancient world, blood.
Leviticus 17 lays out 2 key rules for everyone. First, any animal sacrifice had to be brought to the tabernacle. This was to stop people from slipping back into the kinds of idol worship they'd seen in Egypt. And second, a universal rule. Nobody, and that means nobody, Israelite or foreigner, was allowed to eat blood. And the reason for this was just so profound. Blood represented life itself. And because it represented life, it was set apart, reserved for one single sacred purpose, making atonement for sins at the altar. To eat it would be to treat something holy as common, and that was absolutely forbidden.
All right, so for our last piece of the puzzle, this blueprint for holiness went beyond rituals and food laws. It got right into the structure of the family and the community, creating a really unique moral vision for Israel.
These commands basically drew a huge line in the sand between the Israelites and the cultures around them, like in Egypt and Canaan. They created this protective boundary around the covenant of marriage and condemned practices that were common elsewhere, defining a moral code that was completely distinct.
And to really hammer home just how serious all of this was, the text uses this incredibly powerful metaphor.
the idea that sin acts like a literal, physical poison or contaminant.
Get this. The idea was that these specific sins were so foul, such a deep pollutant, that the land itself would get sick. And just like a body trying to get rid of a sickness, the land would metaphorically vomit out the people who were corrupting it. It's an intense image, right?
So when you put it all together, what do you get? Every single thing we've talked about, the high priest, the scapegoat, the rules about blood and relationships, it all points back to answering that first fundamental question. It's all part of this divine blueprint for how a holy God could possibly live among an unholy people.
And that leaves us with something to think about. These are ancient texts, no doubt, but the principles they're built on, atonement, purity, holiness, renewal, those ideas have echoed down through history. So it makes you wonder, what could living a life of renewal look like for us today?